Imagine you look at your bank account right now, and the balance is steadily going up.
Yeah.
I mean, month after month, year after year, the number just gets bigger.
Right, which feels great.
Exactly. Feels good.
Yeah.
You're getting richer. Right.
Yeah.
That is, well, it's the entirely logical, almost instinctual assumption we all make. But what if, simultaneously, the actual physical foundation of your house is being sold off, brick by brick, just to fund that bank account?
That's a terrifying thought.
Right. I mean,
So-
sure, you have liquid cash,
Yeah.
but your structural capital, the very thing keeping a roof over your head, is literally vanishing.
And it forces a complete recalculation of what wealth actually is. I mean, if you only look at the cash flowing in, you're operating under a dangerous illusion. You really have to look at the balance sheet as a whole, the assets you're liquidating to create that cash flow in the first place.
Yeah.
And that specific illusion is, well, it's exactly what we are dissecting in this deep dive today.
Because we are looking at a diagnostic landscape that is notoriously murky. Macroeconomics.
Very murky.
Yeah. Usually when you get a medical diagnosis, there's precision, right? You break your arm, the x-ray shows a jagged white line, the doctor points to it, and you know exactly what is wrong. It's binary, broken or not broken.
Right.
But when you look at a country's economic health, that x-ray machine is often it's fundamentally miscalibrated. So today, our mission is to decode a really fascinating economic mystery using an immense volume of raw data. We're talking macroeconomic, environmental, and social development data sets from the World Bank and the United Nations.
Which is a mountain of information.
The literal mountain. And all of this focuses on one very specific, highly revealing country, which is Namibia.
And we're going to approach this by sort of building a visual and logical journey in your mind. Think of it as a meticulously structured academic presentation, but brought entirely to life through our discussion here.
Yeah, no boring slides.
Right, exactly. We're going to look past the surface-level illusion of steady GDP growth to uncover the structural challenges and, well, the true hidden cost of what gets labeled as quote-unquote prosperity.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start by picturing the first major visual. Imagine a stark white background, and in the center, there's a simple double-axis line chart.
Okay.
We have a dark blue line that starts on the left and moves steadily upward toward the right. This line represents Namibia's gross domestic product, or GDP, and its gross national income, the GNI.
Right.
Measured in constant 2015 US dollars, this blue line has climbed impressively over the decades. I mean, we are talking about an expansion from around $2.8 billion up to well over $10 billion in recent years.
Which is massive. I mean, if you're a policymaker or, say, a foreign investor looking at that dark blue line, your immediate reaction is celebration.
Oh, absolutely. Pop the champagne.
Exactly. The absolute volume of economic activity has expanded significantly. More goods and services are being produced, money is changing hands with, much greater frequency, and export volumes are up. So by the traditional metrics we use to judge the success of a modern nation state, this is an expanding, highly successful economy.
But here we have to draw the second line on this chart. Beneath that soaring dark blue line, imagine a light gray line trailing along.
Okay.
This line represents a metric called adjusted net savings. And unlike the GDP line, this gray line is not shooting upward. It's stagnating, it fluctuates wildly, and at times it dips dangerously low.
Yeah, that's the red flag.
Right. If you draw a circle around the space between the blue line and the gray line, you see an expanding gap.
And that gap is the core of our mystery today, because it represents the hidden leakage of true national wealth. To understand why this happens, we really have to define the difference between the two metrics.
Right, let's break that down.
So GDP simply measures the speed of the economic engine. It measures how much activity is happening right now within the borders of the country over a given year.
Yeah.
But the thing is, it doesn't care how that activity is generated.
Which means if you basically burn your own house down to stay warm, the GDP counts the heat generated as production.
Exactly. It's a flow metric. It's not a stock metric. Gross national income, or GNI, is slightly different. It accounts for the income retained by the residents of the country, factoring in money sent abroad or received from abroad. But it still suffers from that exact same fundamental flaw.
Right.
It measures income without accounting for the depletion of the underlying assets, and that is where adjusted net savings, our light gray line, comes in.
The reality check line.
Exactly. Adjusted net savings measures whether you are actually putting any fuel in the tank for tomorrow, or if you are simply burning through your structural reserves to create today's heat.
Which takes us straight into the physical reality of what is being burned. Let's look at the actual source of this wealth. Because when we dig into the World Bank ledgers, we see a story fundamentally driven by resource extraction. There is a specific metric tracked here labeled adjusted savings, mineral depletion.
And the numbers attached to that metric are just staggering. I mean, in a highly diversified, modern economy, economic growth is typically driven by innovation, technological efficiency, complex services.
Right, like tech hubs.
Exactly. A software company creates a new application, and wealth is generated from intellectual property, which is infinitely scalable and, importantly, doesn't deplete the earth.
Yeah.
But in this data set, we see that in certain years, the depletion of mineral resources eats up anywhere from 17% to 23% of the entire gross national income.
Wait. Let's just pause on the mechanics of that.
Yeah.
Up to 23% of the nation's entire income is derived from taking something out of the ground, like uranium, diamonds, or copper that literally took millions of years to form and can never, ever be replaced.
Yes. It is the permanent liquidation of natural capital, period.
Wow.
When a massive mining conglomerate extracts a ton of ore and exports it, the transaction registers as a massive boost to the GDP. The money comes in, the top-line economic indicators look fantastic. But the physical wealth of the country, the finite asset sitting in the ground, is gone forever.
So if we go back to our bank account analogy from earlier,
Yeah.
this isn't living off the interest of an investment portfolio. This is selling off the principal balance.
Like, if you inherit $10 million and you spend $2 million a year on luxury cars and expensive dinners, anyone looking at your daily spending habits would assume you are incredibly wealthy and successful. You are moving a lot of money around. Your personal GDP is booming.
But your accountant, looking at your net savings, is absolutely terrified.
Yeah, they're pulling their hair out.
Right, because they know that in 5 years, the principal will be zero, the income will stop, and you will have no underlying assets left to generate future wealth.
Mm-hmm.
And the World Bank explicitly calculates the dollar value of this non-renewable resource extraction, and it subtracts it from the national asset sheet.
Which is brutal.
It is. And crucially, it isn't just the minerals beneath the soil that are disappearing. It's also what grows on top of it.
Right, because the data specifically isolates net forest depletion.
Yeah. While mineral extraction is definitely the dominant force, the net forest depletion metric consistently chips away at the GNI too, hovering around, 0.3% to 0.6% annually.
I mean, 0.5% might sound like a rounding error compared to a 23% mineral loss. It does sound small in a single calendar year, but when you compound an annual 0.5% loss over 3 or 4 decades, you are looking at the steady, irreversible erosion of a critical ecological and economic baseline.
Yeah, that's up.
Because a forest isn't just timber to be sold, it is a complex piece of biological infrastructure. It stabilizes the soil, which is, vital for the massive agricultural sector. It regulates local microclimates and rainfall patterns. It sustains biodiversity.
Oh, it's doing a lot of heavy lifting.
Huge amounts. When you clear-cut a forest and sell the wood, the GDP spikes briefly. But the subsequent soil erosion, the loss of agricultural yield, the disruption of local water cycles, those are long-term economic penalties that just never show up on the GDP ledger.
So the forest is basically doing invisible work, providing free infrastructure services to the country. And when you remove it, you don't just lose the trees. You have to eventually start paying to replicate the services the forest used to provide for free. But the physical removal of resources is really only one side of this equation. If extracting minerals and timber represents what is being taken out of the environment, we also have to look at the economic cost of what is being pumped back into it.
Right. We're moving from the liquidation of assets to the accumulation of liabilities, specifically the invisible environmental tax.
Right.
When an economy relies heavily on primary extraction, heavy industry, and older carbon-intensive transport and power grids, it generates massive amounts of byproducts. And the United Nations and World Bank data sets, they don't just treat these byproducts as abstract ecological concerns, they monetize them.
They put a literal price tag on it.
They calculate the precise hard dollar cost of this damage.
And the two highly specific metrics that jump out here are carbon dioxide emission damage and particulate matter, or PM 2.5 emission damage.
Let's look at the carbon dioxide data first. The CO2 damage costs have steadily climbed right alongside the GDP, reaching well over 180 million US dollars in the most recent data years. Every ton of carbon emitted carries a social cost. It contributes to global climate change, which in turn leads to more extreme weather events, agricultural disruptions, infrastructure stress.
But carbon dioxide is a global gas, right? Its impacts are diffused across the entire planet. What strikes me as far more immediate and frankly far more damaging to the domestic economic engine is the particulate matter, the PM 2.5 pollution.
Yeah, the domestic impact of PM 2.5 is profound. I mean, for context, PM 2.5 refers to microscopic particles suspended in the air that are 2.5 microns or less in diameter.
Which is tiny.
To visualize that, it's about 30 times smaller than the width of a single human hair.
Oh, wow. So because they're so small, they don't get filtered out by your nose or your upper respiratory tract.
Exactly. When you inhale PM 2.5, which is heavily generated by diesel engines, mining dust, industrial combustion, these particles travel deep into the alveoli of your lungs. And from there, they can actually cross the biological barrier directly into your bloodstream.
That's horrifying.
It is. They cause systemic chronic inflammation. They exacerbate asthma, trigger cardiovascular diseases, and ultimately lead to premature mortality.
And the economic data sets assign a direct financial cost to this physiological damage. The data shows that PM 2.5 pollution damage has historically hovered between 1.3% and 2.5% of the entire gross national income.
Yes.
In peak years, we are looking at a cost of upwards of 140 million US dollars just from dust and smoke.
And how they calculate that is fascinating. It's not just a tally of emergency room visits and hospital bills, although those are significant. The core of this calculation is lost labor productivity. It is a hidden, highly regressive tax on human capital.
Yeah.
Think about it. If a 35-year-old mine worker develops chronic respiratory illness and has to miss 20 days of work a year, that is 20 days of lost economic output.
Yeah.
If a parent has to constantly stay home from their job to care for a child having severe asthma attacks triggered by industrial smog, that represents a massive drag on the labor market.
So the GDP is counting the value of the copper coming out of the mine, but it completely ignores the fact that the dust from the mine is permanently disabling the workforce needed to operate the economy tomorrow.
Exactly. It creates a negative feedback loop. The pollution fundamentally degrades the health of the labor pool, which throttles future economic productivity. You're basically sacrificing your human capital to inflate your short-term physical capital.
Man. So we have all these disparate pieces of the puzzle, right? The massive gross savings, the depletion of the minerals, the loss of the forests, the health tax of the air pollution. To really understand the true state of the nation's wealth, we need to consolidate this. We need to squeeze all the artificial inflation out of the data and see what is actually left at the bottom.
And we can visualize this as a waterfall chart. It's honestly one of the most sobering ways to look at macroeconomic data.
Okay, picture a massive waterfall. At the very top, you have a wide, powerful flow of water. This represents the national gross savings. This is the positive number, the total amount of income generated by the entire economy that is not immediately consumed, but theoretically saved.
Right, and it looks incredibly healthy from up there.
But as the water falls over the edge, it hits a series of jagged rocks, and each rock siphons off a massive volume of water. The first rock it hits is the consumption of fixed capital.
Yes.
Before we even talk about nature, we have to talk about physics.
Mm-hmm.
What exactly is the consumption of fixed capital?
Basically, it's entropy. It is the natural, inevitable wear and tear on physical infrastructure.
Okay.
Over time, asphalt roads crack under the sun and the weight of massive trucks. Steel bridges rust. Factory machinery degrades and becomes obsolete. Water treatment plants require massive, expensive overhauls.
So things just break down.
Right. A country has to spend an enormous amount of money just to maintain the physical infrastructure it already has before it can even think about building anything new.
And according to the data, this baseline maintenance, this constant fight against entropy, eats up about 11% to 17% of the GNI. So our waterfall just lost up to a fifth of its volume right at the top.
Exactly. The water continues to fall, and then it hits the second, even larger rock, which is natural resource depletion. Here is where we subtract that massive 17% to 23% chunk, representing the permanently extracted minerals and the depleted forests.
So now we've lost the value of the physical wear and tear, and we've lost the value of the liquidated natural assets. The waterfall is getting dangerously thin.
Very thin. And finally, it hits the third rock, the environmental and health tax. We subtract the monetized damage of the carbon dioxide emissions and the crippling PM 2.5 particulate pollution.
So by the time the water reaches the bottom of the cliff, what is actually left in the pool?
Well, we arrive at the ultimate metric, adjusted net savings, including particulate emission damage. And despite that soaring dark blue GDP line we visualized at the very beginning.
The one that looks so great.
Right. When you account for the depreciation of physical infrastructure, the irreversible loss of natural resources, and the systemic damage to human health, the adjusted net savings crashed down to single digits.
Wow.
And in several recent years in the dataset, the number literally plunges into negative territory.
Right, negative numbers.
Mm,
We were talking about figures like negative 0.65% and even negative 1.83% of the GNI.
yes, it means the country is running a net deficit on its existence.
That's insane.
It is consuming its total capital pool, physical, natural, and human, faster than it is replacing it. To fund today's consumption, to keep that GDP line moving upward, the nation is quietly borrowing from its own future.
Yeah.
It means the country is leaving less total wealth for the next generation than it started with at the beginning of the year.
That completely shatters the illusion. The house is indeed being sold for firewood. But wait, if the overall national wealth is draining while the top-line GDP is growing, I mean, someone, somewhere, is holding the cash from all those mineral exports. The money exists. Where is it?
And this question pivots us from looking at aggregate national wealth to the microeconomics of individual distribution. If the pie is technically getting larger on paper, who is actually eating it?
Right. And to answer that, we have to look at the Gini index. For anyone unfamiliar, the Gini coefficient is the standard mathematical measurement used by economists and sociologists to gauge wealth or income inequality within a nation. It is a scale from 0 to 100.
Exactly. If a country has a Gini index of 0, it means absolute perfect equality. Every single citizen has the exact same amount of income.
A completely flat landscape.
Right. Conversely, a score of 100 represents absolute perfect inequality. One single individual holds 100% of the nation's wealth, and every other citizen has mathematically 0. It is a sheer vertical cliff.
Now, neither extreme actually exists in the real world, of course. But there is a globally recognized danger zone. When a country's Gini index crosses the 40.0 or threshold, economists start sounding alarm bells.
Loud alarm bells.
Because a score of 40 indicates severe structural inequality. It is the point where the wealth gap becomes so vast that it starts to threaten social cohesion, warp political institutions, and just stifle broader economic mobility.
So 40 is the alarm bell.
Yeah.
When we look at the historical data for Namibia, the Gini index has reached astronomical heights, peaking at 71.1.
71.1. I mean, that isn't just past the alarm bell. That is in an entirely different stratosphere of inequality.
It is. It is consistently ranked among the most unequal sovereign states on the planet. And while there have been policy efforts to bring that number down, the most recent data available in this set still places it at an extreme high of 59.1.
That's still a massive red flag. Why is it so structurally resistant to change? How does an economy generate billions in export revenue but leave the vast majority of its citizens so far behind?
The answer is baked directly into the nature of the industries driving the GDP. It connects perfectly back to our discussion on resource depletion. When an economy's primary engine is the extraction of raw materials like uranium, diamonds, base metals, the wealth naturally hyperconcentrates.
Because mining is deeply capital intensive, not labor intensive.
Exactly. 200 years ago, mining meant 10,000 men with pickaxes. Today, a modern commercial mine requires hundreds of millions of dollars in upfront capital. You need massive autonomous drilling rigs, complex chemical processing plants, heavy rail infrastructure.
Yeah, heavy machinery.
Right. You need immense capital, but you only need a relatively small, highly specialized workforce to actually operate the machinery.
So the billions of dollars generated by the mine don't flow out into the surrounding community through tens of thousands of middle-class paychecks.
No, not at all. The vast majority of the revenue flows upward. It goes to service the debt on the heavy machinery. It goes to the multinational corporations that provided the initial foreign direct investment. And it goes to a very small, concentrated domestic elite that holds the mining rights and the adjacent logistics contracts.
So the wealth just bypasses the broader labor force entirely.
Completely bypasses them.
And that structural reality dictates the daily lives of the people trying to survive outside that highly concentrated bubble. Let's shift our focus to the labor market itself. What is everyone else doing if they aren't working in the highly mechanized mines?
The data sets reveal a profound bifurcated labor market. On one side, you have a massive segment of the population anchored to agriculture. If you look at male employment in agriculture, it has historically sat around 30% to 40% of the labor force.
But the value add of that sector, its actual contribution to the GDP, is disproportionately tiny.
Because it is largely low-yield or subsistence farming. It is incredibly hard, physical labor, vulnerable to droughts and climate shocks. But the economic return is macroscopic. I mean, microscopic compared to the industrial sectors. Millions of people are working exhaustingly hard. But the structure of the economy prevents that labor from translating into financial stability.
But the more terrifying data point, the one that really signals a systemic crisis, is happening on the other end of the demographic spectrum. Let's look at the youth population.
The World Bank tracks modeled estimates from the International Labor Organization, the ILO, focusing on a specific metric known as NEET.
Right, and NEET stands for not in education, employment, or training.
It is arguably the most vital health check metric for the future of any economy. If a young person is in school, they're building human capital. If they're employed, they're utilizing human capital. If they're in a vocational training program, they're refining it.
Makes sense.
But if they are NEET, they are completely disconnected from the productive apparatus of the society.
They are essentially an economic purgatory. And the numbers here are just staggering. The NEET rate for the total youth population hovers around 30%. Stretching up to 33.5%.
1 in every 3 young people in the country is completely sidelined.
Wow.
And when you disaggregate the data by gender, the structural failure becomes even more pronounced. For young females, unemployment within the labor force has hit upper bounds of over 50% in certain estimates within this data set.
50%.
Half of the young women actively participating in the labor market, actively searching for a job, simply cannot find one.
If we think about this mechanically, imagine you have a high-performance race car. The engine is brand new, incredibly powerful, roaring and ready to go. That engine is the youth demographic. They have energy, they have decades of potential working life ahead of them. They are desperate for upward mobility.
Right.
But the transmission of the car is completely sheared off. It is physically disconnected from the wheels. You can rev that engine until it redlines, but the car isn't going to move an inch forward. The modern, capital-intensive job market simply does not interface with the massive pool of available labor.
That's a great analogy. The human capital exists in sheer numbers, but the structural avenues to absorb, utilize, and reward that capital are completely missing.
But to truly grasp the nature of this human capital, we can't just look at today's unemployment numbers. We have to look backwards. We have to look at the crucible this labor force just went through. The modern economic reality of this nation has been profoundly scarred and then miraculously reshaped by a massive public health crisis.
Yeah, you cannot talk about macroeconomic data in southern Africa without confronting the shadow of HIV/AIDS. The historical health data tracked here is devastating.
Let's look at the incidence rates from the late 1990s and early 2000s. For adults between the ages of 15 and 49, which is the absolute core of the productive labor force, the incidence rate hit over 23 per 1,000 uninfected people.
Let's contextualize what 23 per 1,000 actually means on a societal level. It means that in a single year, more than 2% of the healthy working-age population contracted a terminal communicable disease.
My God.
And that compounds year after year. We are talking about tens of thousands of new infections annually.
From a purely macroeconomic perspective, stripping away the unimaginable human grief for a moment, the structural damage is catastrophic.
It fundamentally rewrote the demographic and economic baseline. Life expectancy plummeted, the dependency ratio, the number of non-working people, depending on working people, skewed violently as the adult population died, leaving behind a massive crisis of orphaned children.
Yeah.
But perhaps most damaging to the long-term economy was the sudden, massive evaporation of accumulated skills, institutional knowledge, and human capital from the labor market. Teachers, engineers, farmers, civil servants, entire cohorts of expertise were just wiped out.
It is an economic shock that should take a century to recover from, honestly. But when we track the data forward into the 2010s and 2020s, we see a massive, almost unprecedented reversal.
It is one of the most spectacularly successful public health interventions documented in modern data. The trajectory of the nation was altered by 2 highly specific, aggressively scaled interventions, RT and PMT-CT.
Right. RT is antiretroviral therapy. It's the daily medication that stops the HIV virus from replicating, driving the viral load down to undetectable levels. It turns a fatal disease into a chronic, manageable condition. And PMT-CT is the prevention of mother-to-child transmission.
And the data on PMT-CT coverage is a testament to what coordinated public policy can achieve. The plausible bounds for coverage jumped from practically 0% in the early 2000s to hitting 90%, and in recent years, literally touching 100%.
Wow. So by systematically testing expecting mothers and providing immediate antiretroviral prophylactics, they essentially built a biological firewall around the next generation.
They did. By blanketing the population with testing and medication, they crushed the viral replication rate across the society. Consequently, the new HIV incidence dropped drastically, falling from that terrifying peak of over 23 down to roughly 2.6 per 1,000.
Controlling the virus didn't just alleviate the humanitarian disaster.
Yeah.
It literally rescued the macroeconomic future of the nation.
Absolutely.
By preventing mother-to-child transmission, the public health sector ensured that a massive demographic of children could grow up healthy, enter the school system, and eventually form the massive youth labor pool we were just talking about.
They preserved the biological foundation of the human capital. The children survived.
And here's where it gets really complicated. Surviving's not the same as thriving. Public health policy won the battle to keep the kids alive. But what happens when millions of newly healthy children walk into a school system that isn't structurally prepared to handle them?
That brings us to a profound data paradox regarding education. If we look at the pure volume of schooling, the metrics look fantastic. Net enrollment rates in primary school are extremely high. The vast majority of children are physically entering the classroom.
Which is great.
Furthermore, the survival rate to the 5th grade is robust. The infrastructure is catching them.
So the quantity is there. On paper, a government official can point to the data and say, look, 95% of our children are in school. We are investing in human capital. But the data reveals a massive hidden leak in the pipe. We have to introduce a concept called learning poverty.
Learning poverty is an incredibly precise and, frankly, unforgiving metric. It measures the percentage of children at the end of primary school age, usually around 10 or 11 years old, who cannot read and understand a simple age-appropriate text.
It's not testing calculus, it's testing the absolute baseline cognitive foundation required to learn anything else.
Right. And the data shows that a shockingly high percentage of children fall below this minimum reading proficiency threshold. You have a scenario where children are sitting in a classroom for 5 or 6 years, but the actual transfer of knowledge is fundamentally failing.
So if the walls are built, the roof is on, and the kids are in the seats, why aren't they learning to read? How does the system fail so completely while looking so successful on paper?
Because building a physical school is a capital expenditure. It's relatively easy. You pour concrete and put up a chalkboard. But educating a child requires deep, sustained operational investment. It fails because of severe chronic structural deficits. If the teachers themselves lack adequate pedagogical training, or if they're frequently absent due to administrative failures or low pay, the system breaks.
Yeah.
If there are 80 students crammed into a single room with only 5 textbooks to share, the system breaks.
And we also have to factor in the cognitive tax of poverty itself. Right? If a child walks into that classroom chronically undernourished or traumatized by the extreme poverty driven by that 59.1 Gini coefficient we discussed earlier, their neurobiology is essentially locked in a survival state.
Exactly.
They physically cannot absorb the curriculum no matter how hard they try.
It is a tragedy of quality over quantity. The state is expending massive resources to maintain the illusion of an education system, but it is not yielding an economic dividend. If a child graduates from primary school without basic literacy, they are locked out of the modern economy before they even turn 12. They are being pipelined directly into that 33% NEET youth unemployment statistic.
Which brings us to the final structural barrier. Let's say a young person defies the odds. They make it through an under-resourced school, they learn to read, they acquire some technical skills, and they are ready to work. What kind of economy are they actually entering?
They are stepping into an economy bottlenecked by its lack of complexity. Let's visualize a modern high-income economy. It doesn't run on copper ore. It runs on data.
Right.
It requires high-speed internet, efficient digital logistics, secure financial networks. Now let's contrast that with the infrastructure data sets for Namibia.
When I look at the telecommunications data, there is a really interesting split. Mobile cellular subscriptions have absolutely skyrocketed. There's a massive penetration of basic consumer technology. Almost everyone have a cell phone in their pocket.
It proves that the consumer demand and the basic behavioral adaptation are there. But a modern digital economy isn't built on sending text messages. It is built on high bandwidth, secure data transfer.
Yeah.
And when we look at the metrics that actually matter for economic modernization, fixed broadband subscriptions per 100 people, and the concentration of secure internet servers, the numbers are abysmally low.
So if you are an ambitious 22-year-old entrepreneur, You can use your phone to text a client, but if you want to launch a cloud-based logistics software or run a high-volume e-commerce platform or integrate with global digital supply chains, you simply cannot do it.
Yeah.
The physical digital infrastructure just does not exist to support you.
And without secure servers and widespread broadband, an economy cannot transition toward high-value digital services. You cannot attract foreign tech investment, and you cannot transition your labor force into knowledge-based roles. The economy remains physically tethered to the ground.
It remains stuck in the resource trap.
Yeah.
And that vulnerability is glaringly obvious when we look at the export ledgers.
If you build a visual map of the country's exports, it is massively dominated by huge blocks representing primary ores, diamonds, and metals.
Yeah, heavy blocks.
But what is equally important is what is missing from that map. The dataset tracks the percentage of medium and high-tech manufacturing value add within the total manufacturing sector.
And it's practically microscopic.
It's a tiny sliver, and that lack of economic complexity makes the entire nation incredibly fragile. They are at the absolute mercy of global commodity cycles.
So if demand drops, they're in trouble.
Exactly. If a new technology reduces the global demand for copper, or if a global recession temporarily tanks the price of diamonds, the entire national economy goes into a tailspin because they have no complex manufacturing or digital service sector to absorb the shock.
But moving an economy from digging rocks to designing software or building microchips is a monumental task.
Yeah.
What is the fundamental requirement to make that jump?
It requires an airtight foundation of governance. It requires robust, transparent institutions. The data sets we are analyzing include percentile rankings for critical governance metrics like control of corruption and rule of law.
And Namibia ranks decently here, right? I mean, they float in the 50% to 60% range globally.
Yes. Compared to many regional peers, they show institutional stability. But middle of the pack is not enough to break out of a resource trap. To truly drive high-quality economic complexity, to convince a multinational corporation to build an advanced manufacturing plant rather than just digging another mine, you need world-class governance.
Because capital is cowardly. Investors need absolute ironclad certainty that their contracts will be enforced by an impartial judiciary, that unpredictable corruption won't suddenly eat their profit margins, and that the regulatory environment won't just shift overnight.
Exactly. Governance isn't just a political ideal. It is the ultimate economic shield against the resource trap. It is the operating system upon which all other economic software runs.
Wow. Okay, so we have layered all these data sets on top of each other. We've looked at the true cost of resource depletion, the health tax of pollution, the extreme inequality, the triumph over HIV, the crisis of learning poverty, and the digital bottlenecks. Now we have to look at the ticking clock driving all of this. Let's look at the demographic data.
If you visualize the population age structure as a pyramid, Namibia's data shows an incredibly wide base. There is a massive swelling cohort of young people, specifically the 15 to 29 age bracket, who are currently pushing up into the prime working age demographic.
The high-performance engine we talked about earlier is rapidly expanding.
In traditional macroeconomic theory, this is the golden moment. When a massive cohort of young people enters the workforce, while the dependency ratio of elderly people remains relatively low, it creates what we call a demographic dividend.
Right.
These young people get jobs, they earn disposable income, they buy houses, they pay taxes, and the economy achieves exponential sustained growth. It is exactly how the Asian tiger economies transformed themselves in the late 20th century.
But, and this is a huge, but a demographic dividend is not automatic. It requires specific conditions to ignite.
Precisely. Let's synthesize the data we have unpacked today. Imagine this massive wave of youth entering the market. If a large portion of them suffers from learning poverty, meaning they lack the basic cognitive skills required for modern work.
Yeah.
And if they face a labor market with a 33% neat unemployment rate.
Right.
And if the economy they are trying to enter remains entirely reliant on highly automated exclusionary mining instead of expanding into high-tech services because there are no secure servers.
Then the spark never catches. The dividend doesn't happen.
It's worse than that. The demographic dividend inverts into a demographic crisis.
Oh, man.
A massive, rapidly expanding population of young, energetic, underskilled, unemployed, and deeply frustrated citizens is not an economic engine. It is a profound structural and social powder keg.
It completely reframes everything. I mean, we started this deep dive by looking at a simple, soaring, dark blue line of GDP growth. On the surface, the narrative was absolute success. But by meticulously peeling back the layers of the data, by looking at the actual physical constraints of the reality, we have uncovered the true story.
The illusion of growth masks the erosion of the foundation.
So, if a policymaker or anyone interested in structural development is listening to this, what is the strategic roadmap? Based purely on the hard evidence in these data sets, what are the 3 essential steps to turn the illusion of GDP growth into true, sustainable prosperity?
The data dictates a very clear 3-step mandate. Number 1, stop the unmitigated bleeding of natural capital. The resource extraction will continue, but the wealth generated from selling off the country's physical foundation cannot be used for short-term consumption.
It has to be saved.
It must be captured and aggressively reinvested into sovereign wealth funds, physical infrastructure, and human capital to completely offset the negative adjusted net saving.
You have to convert the finite rock into an infinite asset.
Okay.
Okay, number 2, a total overhaul of effective education. The state must move beyond the illusion of enrollment statistics and declare war on learning poverty.
Absolutely.
Building the classroom isn't enough. You have to guarantee that the child sitting inside it is actually acquiring the complex cognitive skills the future global economy demands.
And number 3, industrial and digital upgrading. Break the reliance on primary resource extraction by aggressively building out the physical digital infrastructure, secure servers, widespread broadband, while simultaneously elevating governance standards to attract complex manufacturing.
Yeah.
You must build the transmission that connects the massive engine of the youth demographic to the wheels of the modern global economy.
It's an immense challenge, but the data proves that monumental shifts are possible. I mean, just look at the eradication of the HIV crisis. When the system mobilizes, it works.
That is the ultimate takeaway. The datasets offer a diagnosis, but they also offer the cure.
To close this out, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final lingering thought. We spent this entire time talking about billions of dollars, megatons of carbon, and vast reserves of uranium and diamonds. But if there is one ultimate truth hiding in these numbers,
True wealth isn't found in the minerals buried under the ground. True national wealth is measured by a youth population that can read, possesses modern skills, and operates within a system of fair wealth distribution.
we started by asking you to imagine your house. The bank account looks full, but the bricks are disappearing. What this data proves is that you have a choice. You don't have to spend the money from those bricks on a fleeting party today. You can take that capital, invest in the minds of the next generation, build a digital infrastructure, and construct an indestructible fortress for tomorrow. We encourage you to take this analytical lens with you. The next time you see a headline celebrating top-line economic growth, whether it's about a developing nation, your own country, or even your own company, look past the blue line. Ask yourself, what is the true hidden cost and what is actually being saved for tomorrow?